listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
If you're like me, you turn on the morning news and you try to look at what are the big things going on, what are the big trends. Our guest today was on the news this morning talking about some of the big trends related to the oil industry and the fueling industry. Instead of 2 minutes that they gave him on cable news, we're going to dive in a little deeper and spend about 20 minutes. So let's get right going and welcome our guest, Denton Cinquegrana with OPIS, who's going to take us through what he sees the fuels market may look like this fall. So welcome,
Hey,
Denton.
Jeff, how are you? Good to be on with you again. Always a pleasure.
So this summer, we've seen gas prices fall from a record high about the middle of June, over $5 a gallon, national average higher in other markets. It's dropped more than $1. We know that there's some pressures that might reverse that. But as we head into the fall, here we are in mid-August, late August right now. What are the couple big issues that you're looking at with the fuels market?
For me, the biggest one right now is diesel. Diesel inventories in the United States are well below where they would normally be at this time. European, and it's not just a United States issue. It's a global issue with diesel right now. Gasoline, we move into the fall, demand tends to go down. The formulation for gasoline changes. It's a little bit cheaper to make, etc. But again, I think for me, the focus right now is really on diesel. I mean, gasoline is still obviously very high priced, even though we've just recently went below $4 a gallon. We'll see how long that lasts for. But again, I think the diesel issue is kind of here to stay. And a lot of it has to do with the issues in Europe and natural gas and electricity.
So when you talk about diesel, There may be people out there saying, I don't drive a diesel car. Why should I care? There may be people that say, I don't sell diesel fuel at my convenience store or gas station. I shouldn't care. But you should care because it's all tied together. Can you kind of walk us through why diesel matters?
Sorry.
Besides the fact that a lot of things move on diesel, but it's part of a bigger infrastructure that there's some serious concerns.
Well, you're absolutely right. And that's kind of the biggest thing. And that's the thing that touches the consumer is the fact that everything you buy, whether it's in a convenience store, whether it's in a grocery store, whether it's in a big box retailer, is getting onto those shelves by a truck that was running on diesel. And if diesel prices get too high or as high as they have been, the fleet owners are going to pass those costs on to the customer, which is the store. And those are being passed on to the end user, you and I, or whoever is shopping in those stores. So that's why you're seeing a lot of prices for food, especially this past summer. And I think that's going to continue. The bigger issue also is because of natural gas shortages in Europe, because they've been cut off from Russia, more sanctions are going into place, in early December. And a lot of countries are looking at using oil and diesel burning infrastructure to produce to produce electricity for the wintertime, for heating purposes, et cetera, or just to run facilities. So again, you see a little bit of fuel switching because right now in the United States, natural gas is probably about $8-9 per MMBTU. It's essentially 7 to 10 times that in Europe. It's very expensive, and you think our utility bills are going to be high this winter. You should get a look at some of the ones in Europe.
Wow, so they're that much higher?
Yeah, it's significantly higher. It's mind-numbingly higher. And again, it's not necessarily an apples to oranges content or comparison, but because of heat content and BTUs, et cetera. But natural gas in Europe is almost the equivalent of $300 a barrel of oil. So when you kind of consider that,
and also, yeah, also as we head towards the fall, diesel fuel demand is different than gasoline demand. Gasoline demand peaks in the summer months, and then it tapers off when people go back to work, go back to school. Now, certainly we're in different times where not as many people are going in the office, but and demand has been down a little because of that this summer. But diesel fuel demand picks up in the fall related to the harvest.
That's right.
Also, because diesel fuel is essentially a part of a broader category called distillate, which is home heating oil.
Right.
And while many areas of the country can't imagine that they will be turning on the heat, eventually they will be turning on the heat for home heating. And that's going to put even more pressure on diesel. Will that also, in addition to how it may play out in terms of finding diesel, will refiners have to readjust, and will that have an impact ultimately on gasoline prices?
It can, and actually, what the market's saying to refiners right now is make as much diesel as you can. And one of the major refiners in their second quarter conference call a couple of weeks ago actually said, hey, we've been in maximum distillate mode for a couple of weeks now, and they suspect that all the other refiners are doing the same thing, just because making diesel is more profitable right now, and it typically is anyway. But you really can't you can't go 100% diesel and 0% gasoline. You could tweak it a couple percentage points here and there, but for the most part, it's a very, it's more small increments that you could do. You could tweak the refinery and to make perhaps more diesel at the expense of gasoline. Going into the fall season, it's pretty easy to kind of sacrifice gasoline. But again, if we have a spike in demand, refinery issues. And you know what? We're getting into the kind of fall or early fall. Hurricanes are usually anytime from mid-August through early October is kind of the kind of peak window. We've been fortunate so far, so knock on wood there. But we're entering the danger zone, and what we'll watch if we do see any tropical activity kind of manifest itself is that swath of the country between New Orleans, Louisiana, and Corpus Christi, Texas. That's just you never want to see a major hurricane hit, but that swath of the country, that's just the no-go zone. That's something we just really don't want.
Yeah, I want to touch on that in a second, but first I just want to allude to, a lot of people look at shortcuts. How is this year compared to other years? And I think the one that they most cite is the year 2008, and that's when gas prices hit a record, hit $4.11 a gallon. They also dropped fairly significantly, much more significantly than this year, actually. And there were talks about a recession. There were talks about things like that. Is this similar to 2008? And what, if it is, what can we learn from what happened in 2008? Or is there a better example?
Yes and no. It's like 2008 because obviously we had a record high in prices. There are some major differences, though, considering what minimum wage is now versus minimum wage then. A higher percentage of your disposable income was going into paying for a gallon of gasoline versus 2022. That also preceded a really bad recession, the Great Recession, kind of the financial markets meltdown, the mortgage-backed security issues. And again, I'm not an investment banker, so couldn't get too deep into that. But I did see the movie The Big Short, so hopefully we don't get a situation like that. But I think part of the reason why we've seen gasoline prices and oil prices come down, over the course of the summer, and this is one of those rare times, I'm not sure we have something to compare it to, because from, like you mentioned earlier, we peaked on June 14th. Every day so far this summer, the prices dropped, which I just find incredible, considering we're in the middle of the summer. We're in the summer. Driving demand, yes, it's down versus year ago levels, but it's still pretty solid, pretty decent demand. Obviously, well above pandemic levels. So, to see the gas price drop every single day so far this summer has been pretty interesting. And I don't know if you could necessarily compare it to other things, but the reason why we've been dropping is there's these real fears of us going into not just the United States, but the entire world, particularly Europe, going into a recession. You have China with their no COVID policies that would keep a lid on demand as well. So you have a culmination of things that have come together to kind of drop prices the way they have been over the course of the summer. And
I'll just take it down down as in a downer notch. You had mentioned hurricanes earlier, and we've been lucky so far. I know that they've said that we expect this year to be an above average hurricane season. The challenge is, and you had mentioned the Gulf Coast, there's about half as many refineries as there were in 1980. So if a refinery goes down, we're producing more, but there are fewer refineries that are producing. So when one goes down, it has a bigger impact, and that is always a concern. How big a concern should that be if we lose a refinery or two for an extended period of time? And actually, whether you're an expert on hurricanes, I'll throw it out there. Why are we not getting the hurricanes? I've heard it's because of sandstorms in the Sahara that's kept the swirls at bay that form hurricanes. But should we be really concerned about hurricanes, particularly with fewer refineries?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, yes, absolutely, the fewer refineries, but we're doing more with less, basically. I know the argument is we haven't built a refinery from the ground up since 1976, or I think that's the 76, 78, somewhere in the late 70s.
Yep. Ford was president.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you have a bunch of small ones that popped up, but we've added so much capacity to existing refineries that, we've really added probably about 7 or 8 kind of world-class refineries to the system over the years. But with that being said, a refinery goes over that Gulf Coast section. You have a refinery that shuts down for, several days. The good thing about there's nothing good about a refinery. I should rephrase that. With a hurricane, you have enough of a warning to say, okay, we're in this cone of uncertainty. We could reduce operations. We could take ourselves offline. And once it passes, if there's no damage, we can get up and running pretty quickly. There's enough of a warning, unlike, an earthquake or, a tsunami, like
tornado.
Or a tornado. Exactly,
yeah.
Jeff. So with a hurricane, at least you have a little bit of an early detection, a bit of a warning saying, hey, let's get ahead of this. Let's shut it down. And the refinery operators have gotten really good at this. I don't know if they have better weathermen than I see on TV who seem to be wrong all the time, but whether that's the case, but they've gotten really good. And if a hurricane passes through pretty quickly and there's no damage, and really it's quite fascinating though, if a hurricane is just a little bit to the west or a little bit to the east, you could kind of skate through, even though it kind of went right down the street, So it's a very interesting thing. But going back to your original thought about how, winds have kind of chopped them up a little bit so they can't really form. Heard the same thing, even despite the fact that the Gulf waters are really warm right now and conducive to formation. But I think there's been some wind shears that have been just kind of breaking things up before they could really get going.
Yeah, so there are obviously concerns related to what's going on with Russia and what's going on in Europe, and of course, if the tropics heat up. But want to talk a little bit about some good news and just what is good out there. We know that gas prices have come down. We know they've come down for a variety of reasons. It's partially demand. It's partially that we've increased production because over the last couple months since the war with Russia and Ukraine, we've added capacity. So there are some things that the system always repairs itself. The question is, how long does it take to repair itself? Everybody would always like it to be faster, but that is some good news in all this process, that we usually hit equilibrium, never as fast as we'd like. Are there other good things out there related to the fueling infrastructure?
To your point, your original point, yes, this is a case of the cure for high prices is high prices. You have motivation to run your refineries as hard as possible. A lot of refining companies have put off maintenance because just the margins right now have just been so spectacular. Crude oil producers in West Texas and New Mexico and Colorado and North Dakota, there's motivation to bring more production online. So hopefully the returns and stuff like that have them investing for future needs. This is everything we've seen so far, yes, the war with Russia and Ukraine it was kind of the tipping point, but a lot of this goes back to 2020 from the fact that refiners, producers, and kind of everyone in between were getting hit by this such a low demand environment, low prices, etc. They had no money to invest for future production. And now you're hoping they put some of this away for kind of a rainy day fund and, be ready to add some more production when it's needed. So I think that's probably a piece of good news. But again, I think as the global population continues to grow, we just need an all hands on deck approach. Renewables are great, solar, wind, all these clean ideas and everything. It's great, but at some point, you just need everything. I mean, as more and more, I think earlier this summer we crossed 8 billion people on the planet. It takes a lot of energy for 8 billion people to be happy, so we can all continue to, watch Netflix and, watch ball games and stuff like that. So, the important stuff. But, you need a lot of energy to, the world's going to go around anyway, but to make the world go around, for lack of a better term. But yeah, no, I think the fact that prices are coming down is obviously welcome news. I do think for, gasoline retailers and station owners and refiners and producers, I think demand is probably, biased a little bit higher. Now, granted, the biggest threat, I think, to retailers as far as gasoline demand is concerned, and this is over the next decade, it's not necessarily electric vehicles as much as, people in the press would want you to think. It's the efficiency of vehicles. We have the new CAFE standards. That's gonna add up pretty quickly, and that's gonna take gasoline demand down over the longer term before electric vehicles, really reach critical mass.
Yeah, if you think about it, just an increasing car efficiency 10% is going to take a bigger chunk out of demand than as many EVs, because there's fewer than 1% of the vehicles on the road are EVs right now. It's growing, but there's 280 million vehicles roughly that still need fuel, and they don't run on charging.
Right. And it takes a long time for that vehicle fleet to turn over. So if I buy a new car tomorrow that's an internal combustion engine, I'm not replacing that for another 10, 12, possibly even 15 years. And now that I, kind of work from home, don't really go nowhere, 15 is probably the minimum now. At least in my personal case. I mean, everybody's different. But yeah, I think this industry, obviously, the petroleum industry, it's going to be around for a long time. I know everyone likes the EVs are the kind of shiny new toy. And that's probably a podcast for a whole nother time, is just some of the difficulties that they're having with finding the materials for batteries. And, just kind of the whole electrify everything play is a lot easier said than done. It's kind of like, when the president is asking producers to produce more oil, you don't just snap your fingers and more appears. So again, like you were illustrating before, these things take time. And, I think I'm the perfect example is I'm not patient. So, I think you have governments and officials that just aren't patient. And if you don't have, kind of immediate response, you have angry constituents, and that's never a good thing, especially going into a midterm election year.
Absolutely agree. And I'll leave with one final question. And usually at the start of podcasts, we explained, who this group is, why they matter. I want to end with this because I think everybody in our industry knows OPIS, the Oil Price Information Service, and we know that you report numbers to AAA, and we had AAA on earlier this year, and they talked about how people are excited. They set their alarm for midnight to watch the prices. What are they going to do this day, particularly when they're climbing? But I think a lot of people would be interested if you just kind of tell us how does OPIS get these numbers? What's the process that every day you survey X number of stations and you get this information that you report to AAA? What is that whole big process? Because it must be massive.
Yeah, it's very big. And obviously, it goes throughout the supply chain. We watch the futures market. Now, I have a screen going right now where I see what WTI is doing. I see what gasoline's doing. I see what diesel is doing. But then we have a spot market, which is kind of the next level up. This is where physical barrels of gasoline and diesel are traded in 7 different spot markets. We have a staff of guys and gals who are collecting those trades and at the end of the day processing them and putting them into reports that we sell to customers. People will use those numbers to say Jeff, you're selling me a cargo of gasoline and we're going to have it delivered into the New York harbor. Well, we're going to use an OPIS 3-day average to kind of determine that price. So we're third party impartial. We have a strict methodology that we follow in regards to that. And then from there, you go to that rack market. That's that big wholesale market that everyone, kind of knows and loves. And that's where OPIS, kind of came into existence back in the, early 80s, in that, fuel prices were deregulated and you needed an impartial third party to bring price discovery. And that's how OPIS was essentially born, by talking to people. And, at first it was like, the stories I get from the founders is like, hey, I don't want you reporting my prices. And eventually we were getting them from all their customers. And they said, well, you know what? You can't fight City Hall. We're going to give you our prices to make sure you're not getting the wrong prices. So that's, kind of how that wholesale thing came into play. Really with the retail stuff, it really just kind of started with a little bit of information here. And then it just snowballed. And now we're at the point where, customers are just putting their numbers right in to a direct feed. And that's why, we could kind of aggregate this stuff a lot quicker. So for example, we'll have, that AAA number, that's a point in time, but we have some internal tools where you could see, and maybe it's a little bit of cheating for, at least for me, when I go on Twitter and say, hey, the price is continuing to drop, because I'm seeing what the price is doing throughout the day as more and more customers come in and automate their systems and, feed those prices into us, because what we have software that also helps them with pricing. So a station doesn't have to go out, send a manager out and do a survey in that, say 5-mile radius and look at other stations, write things down. This way you could pump in the prices, you could get all your competitions, you could set your, parameters up and everything and see everything from there. And it's just, kind of a extension of technology that we've seen over the years. So that's kind of the short and sweet Cliff Notes version of what we do and kind of how we do it.
Well, since you mentioned Cliff Notes, that relates back to the 80s or 70s that I remember. And thinking about when OPIS started, there was no internet. There were no personal computers. And just thinking, I don't know if it was fax, I don't know if it was whatever. And I've been talking to our kids and saying, we'd go out and we'd go meet somebody at a concert or meet somebody at a baseball game. And it's like, we'll meet at 7:30 or 6:30 at gate B. And they'd like, did you show up? And it's like, yeah. And it's like, why? Because you wrote them a letter and you just said you're going to be there. So I'd imagine these early OPIS reports, maybe the fax machine was around, maybe there was a lot of postage involved, but it's gone quite, all of our reporting and all of our intelligence in our industry has just had massive changes now, where you're staring at multiple screens, watching things happen, as opposed to inter-office envelopes and stamps and all that other fun stuff. So it's amazing how much it's advanced, and OPIS has led in how retailers look at prices. So thank you, Denton.
Oh, my pleasure.
For the overview and looking at what we're going to see this fall, and working with NACS on a variety of things, because market intelligence is always a good thing when you're selling fuel and you want to continue to sell fuel. So thank you all for listening today, and thank you, Denton.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.